You're lying, Ben, and you know it. The room fell silent. Cameras kept rolling. Ben Shapiro's eyes widened, just a flicker, but enough. Kash Patel had just accused one of the most vocal conservative voices in America of deliberately misleading the public about the role of U.S. intelligence agencies, in front of millions. But what was Shapiro lying about? What did Kash mean when he whispered, almost off mic, "They came after me because I wouldn't play their game"? Who exactly is they? Is this just another clash of egos? Or did Kash just pull back the curtain on something deeper, something darker? What if everything we thought we knew about the deep state was about to be rewritten, not by a left-wing whistleblower, but by one of Trump's closest national security allies? Let's rewind, because this scandal didn't erupt overnight. And the truth? It's messier than any headline dares to print. Kash Patel wasn't just another political commentator. He was on the inside. DOD Chief of Staff, a key figure in unraveling the Russia probe, and a man who knew where the classified bodies were buried. And Ben? He wasn't just a commentator either. He was the gatekeeper of what conservative America considered acceptable truth. So why did Patel publicly confront him? Why now? It all began with a leaked phone call, one neither of them knew had been recorded. A high-level conversation about how the intelligence community allegedly manages media narratives, and more specifically, how dissenting voices, like Kash, get frozen out, discredited, and surveilled. In that call, Ben is heard saying, "Look, I get it, but we can't afford to platform you if you're going to go full Langley conspiracy mode." Patel's response? A warning. "Keep pretending, Ben, but don't say I didn't warn you when the files drop." And then, the files did drop. Documents, memos, names of journalists, of operatives, even of tech CEOs, all allegedly involved in a quiet but massive coordination effort led by certain intelligence officials during and after the Trump administration. Documents that suggested data was manipulated, operations scrubbed from history, and narratives fed directly into major media pipelines. But here's the twist. Some of those memos? They referenced contacts linked to Shapiro's own network. Coincidence or coordination? As Kash went public, pressure mounted. Ben tried to pivot, then deflect. But when they finally appeared on camera together, for what was meant to be a calm debate, it detonated. The quote you heard? That wasn't even the end. It was just the opening blow. So what's real? Who's protecting who? And why is no one talking about what happened after the show was cut off? The documents weren't meant to leak. Not in 2024. Not now. And definitely not by him. But somehow Kash Patel had them. Not redacted summaries, not vague outlines, real files. Stamped, signed, and traced back to obscure black-budget operations that were never meant to be publicly acknowledged. When Kash released the first wave of documents during an exclusive live stream, the feed mysteriously cut off mid-sentence. Within minutes, his team's server crashed. Minutes later, bots flooded the replay with fake copyright claims. Instagram froze his backup account. Coincidence? He didn't think so. Let's rewind. 3 weeks before the infamous confrontation with Ben Shapiro, a former intelligence officer, known only by the code name Caspian, met Kash in a dimly lit hotel suite in Arlington. Caspian didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thin black folder across the table. "They buried this after 2019. We kept a few receipts." Inside were internal communications from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the kind that never leave the building. One memo read, "Narrative realignment complete. Media assets in place. Shapiro's gate remains firm." That last line? Chilling. Shapiro's gate. What did it mean? Was Ben a willing participant or just another pawn? Kash didn't say anything publicly. Not yet. He spent the next week cross-checking every detail with his own contacts. What he found was worse than he expected. There were direct connections between intelligence briefings and conservative media strategies. News cycles were engineered. Words were chosen in classified rooms before they ever hit teleprompters. And Ben? Ben was allegedly briefed, not on what to say, but on what not to say. Lines he wasn't allowed to cross. Questions he shouldn't ask. And every time he brushed too close to those boundaries, the same people who fed him scoops would vanish for weeks. His source stream dried up like clockwork. He knew. He had to know. So when Kash confronted him live, it wasn't just about a lie. It was about years of strategic silence. The files Kash held proved, or at least strongly suggested, that certain pundits had been indirectly coordinated through third-party think tanks, shells created by former CIA contractors. These think tanks were funded through a string of anonymous LLCs based in Delaware, the Virgin Islands, and Cyprus. The money trail was real, the silence bought. And the moment the public began paying attention, the disinformation campaigns kicked in. Bot accounts flooded X, claiming the documents were Russian propaganda. Hashtags like #CashConspiracy and had deep fake files trended overnight. But the forensic audits? They showed the documents were genuine, older than deepfake tools, embedded with government file signatures that matched prior known leaks. Still, Ben stayed quiet. He said nothing about the folder, nothing about Caspian, nothing about Shapiro's gate. Until one night he tweeted just one word. False. That was it. One word. But it lit the fuse again. Kash fired back with another file, an internal media operations proposal referencing selective gatekeeping via ideological alignment. One of the line items? Ensure Shapiro continuity. That's when things spiraled. Journalists on both sides of the aisle demanded answers. Tucker Carlson invited Kash for an interview. Glenn Greenwald hinted that he had received similar files. The White House press secretary was asked twice whether intelligence assets still liaised with major media figures. She dodged. And still, silence from Ben, at least publicly. Because privately? Patel's phone buzzed with a blocked number. A deep voice said, "You're playing a dangerous game, Kash. People get erased for less." Was it a bluff or a reminder? We'll expose the private meetings Ben allegedly attended, the key names in the intelligence media pipeline, and the mysterious disappearance of a former DOJ analyst who tried to come forward. But before we go there, what would you do if you were in Kash's shoes? Would you keep leaking? Or walk away before it's too late? The whistleblower never made it to the hearing. Her name was Alana Brooks, senior analyst at the DOJ, specializing in foreign influence and internal security policy. She was scheduled to testify in a closed-door congressional session about the role of federal agencies in influencing domestic media narratives. Her flight was booked. Her lawyer confirmed. But the night before, she vanished. No forced entry, no note. Her security badge was deactivated by the DOJ itself, 23 minutes after she last used it to access a secure server. Kash knew her. They had spoken briefly, just once. She'd hinted at something called Operation Glasslight, a decades-old psychological influence initiative reactivated in the mid-2010s. She said it involved private media personalities being placed on sympathetic asset registers. She said there were logs. She said Ben Shapiro was on one of them. And then, silence. Now the pieces weren't just abstract theories. They were names, faces, fingerprints. When Kash received a flash drive in an unmarked envelope days later, the first file was titled Sympathetic Assets, Tier 1, Phase 2. Ben Shapiro's name was on slide 4. Next to his, J.S., believed to be Jordan Schlochtel, D.B., possibly Dan Bongino, and under a blurred redaction, a chilling phrase. Tier escalation recommended pending compliance review. Kash stared at that phrase for hours. Escalation. Compliance. What the hell did that even mean? According to the documents, these individuals weren't formally recruited. They were nudged, incentivized, given access, tips, exposure, until saying the right things wasn't just expected, it was necessary. Ben may not have sold out, but he was surrounded, and the deeper Patel looked, the darker it got. Meeting logs from a think tank called Liberty Watch Institute showed irregular payments and consultations involving figures with past intelligence affiliations. Kash identified 3 of them as former CIA operatives who had once run influence programs abroad. Only now, it wasn't Iraq. It was Indiana. It wasn't Kabul. It was Kentucky. The target? The American mind. Kash published the Glasslight files, but only partially. He blurred names, redacted personal data. He said, "I'm not trying to destroy people. I'm trying to wake them up." But it was already too late. Within hours, mainstream outlets labeled it a revenge conspiracy. Ben's team issued a brief statement. Mr. Shapiro has never knowingly participated in any intelligence operation, foreign or domestic. These allegations are absurd. But the pressure was building. Podcasters were asking real questions. Joe Rogan called the story crazy, but not unbelievable. Tim Pool went further. What if the real disinformation campaign was hiding in plain sight? What if we've all been groomed? Kash remained calm, but in private, his allies weren't. One former Pentagon official texted him, "They're going to turn you into a pariah, brother. You crossed the last line." He had. And the real damage was just beginning. Because then came the second leak. Internal Slack messages from a tech company believed to be coordinating with government agencies to throttle certain voices, including Patel's. They included terms like liminal suppression, algorithmic fencing, and compliance thresholds. More than just censorship, this was preemptive erasure. And guess who was on the monitor priority list? Kash Patel, Glenn Greenwald, and Ben Shapiro. Wait, Ben too? Why was his name there? Was he being watched too? Controlled or threatened? And that's when the story twisted again. Because in a deleted text message, one Kash's team recovered from a backup, Ben allegedly wrote, "They said if I speak up, they'll leak the Afghanistan op. You know which one." Wait, what Afghanistan op? Who's they? What was Ben so afraid of? We'll expose the one mission that binds them all, an off-the-books operation, long classified, now weaponized as blackmail. And you'll finally understand why both men fear the same shadow. They called it Operation Cerberus, but officially, it never existed. Launched in the waning days of the Obama administration, Cerberus was designed to be a high deniability operation. Its goal: identify American citizens with large platforms and influence, especially within conservative media, and monitor their potential susceptibility to narrative alignment strategies. It wasn't espionage. It wasn't even surveillance in the traditional sense. It was something worse: behavioral mapping, real-time tracking of influence chains, private correspondences, and reaction analytics. Algorithms designed not just to listen, but to predict. And Ben Shapiro? He wasn't just on the list. He was one of the first profiles Cerberus built. The recovered files, buried on a wiped NSA subserver and anonymously dumped to Patel's encrypted drive, included case studies, social network heat maps, and psychological pressure point summaries. Pages of metadata tied to everything: articles Ben had written, tweets he'd liked, interviews he'd dodged, even internal memos from Daily Wire where his tone had been flagged as off-narrative. But here's the twist. They never used Ben to push disinfo. They used his silence. He became a firewall, trusted, articulate, rational. If Ben didn't talk about it, then it probably wasn't true. He wasn't an agent of chaos. He was a comfort zone, a psychological anchor. And when Operation Cerberus shifted into Phase 3, actual manipulation of trending cycles, Ben was deemed a stabilizing pillar. One document literally called him a barrier against ideological contamination. But what about the Afghanistan op? Patel finally spoke about it, cryptically, during an off-air segment with Glenn Greenwald. He didn't say much, but it was enough. In early 2018, a black site detainment facility in northern Afghanistan, officially decommissioned, was quietly reactivated. Its mission: interrogate not foreign terrorists, but rogue American contractors suspected of leaking internal security briefings to journalists. The facility was under the command of a JSOC unit, one that Ben had, through a family contact, once lobbied on behalf of. He had sent a single email, recommending a junior analyst for a civilian review board post. That analyst later oversaw the site's information acquisition protocols. Ben's name was nowhere near the redacted mission files. But in intelligence circles, even adjacency means liability, and someone was holding it over him. When Patel confronted him that night on camera, he wasn't just calling out media manipulation. He was cornering a man shackled by the knowledge that speaking meant unleashing a storm that could destroy him, and possibly others. But why did Kash take the risk? Because he realized the deep state wasn't a cabal of cigar-smoking elites in a basement. It was a machine, faceless, modular, self-protecting. And the only way to break it wasn't through politics. It was through exposure. And now, Operation Glasslight, Operation Cerberus, the digital hand guiding the headlines, the quiet war behind the news cycle. It's not about left or right. It's about control. So what happens next? That's up to us. Kash has gone dark again. His team says he's off-grid. Rumors swirl of new files, bigger names, deeper layers. Some say he's meeting with foreign press. Others say he's preparing one final release, a true kill switch. And Ben? He hasn't posted in days. His last episode opened with no commentary, just a quote from Solzhenitsyn. "We know they are lying. They know they are lying. They know we know they are lying. We know they know we know they are lying. And still, they lie." This isn't just a scandal. This is a reckoning. So ask yourself, how much of what you believe was chosen for you? Let's talk about it in the comments. Let's ask the questions no one else is asking. And if you're ready for more, subscribe. Because this story, it's not over.